this message found you. Your awareness was drawn here through invisible currents, not by accident. Because attention itself is never random. It's one of consciousness's most exact technologies. If you're present right now, stop for a moment. Feel what exists in the space before a thought crystallizes. That quiet pocket of pure awareness. That's the bandwidth where this message lives. Not in what you believe, not in what you imagine, but in what you directly perceive. The Arcturian Council doesn't broadcast to the masses because most people aren't tuned to receive from a calm, coherent state. Most minds scatter too quickly. Most nervous systems chase the next stimulus before integration can occur. This isn't about spirituality, it's about biology. When mental activity quiets, when your sense of self loosens, when your focus stabilizes into the now, reality itself begins to interact with you differently. If you've arrived here, something within your field is already resonating at that frequency. You didn't need to grasp the meaning of these words intellectually. You only needed to be receptive. Stay present, not to acquire new concepts, but to let your entire perceptual framework reorganize from the inside out. This isn't data transmission. This is coherence activation. Before we move deeper, understand something crucial about how these transmissions work. The Arcturian Council operates outside linear time, which means their communication doesn't follow the rules of human language or sequential thought. They're not speaking to your logical mind. They're interfacing directly with the quantum field of your consciousness, the layer beneath thought where reality is still fluid, still forming. This is why some people can listen to these words and feel absolutely nothing, while others experience a complete recalibration of their entire perceptual system. It's not about the words themselves. It's about the carrier wave beneath the words, the frequency embedded in the silence between sentences. Your nervous system is the receiver, not your beliefs, not your spiritual resume, not how many books you've read or how many years you've meditated. Your nervous system's capacity to remain regulated, present, and coherent determines whether you can hold the bandwidth of this transmission. Think of it like a radio. The broadcast is always happening, always streaming through the field. But if your receiver is constantly scanning, jumping between stations, flooded with static from stress and reactivity, you'll never lock onto the signal clearly enough to receive the full transmission. The first frequency, awareness before language. Recognition doesn't show up as a thought. It arrives as a perceptual shift that happens before words form, before your mind tries to categorize or label the experience. Something recalibrates inside you, quietly, somatically, neurologically. Maybe it's a subtle opening in your chest. Maybe your breathing deepens without effort. Maybe you notice that your attention has dropped into this exact moment without being forced there. This isn't your imagination creating something. This is consciousness restructuring itself in real time. Your body knows this shift before your thinking mind catches up. That's why genuine recognition feels calm, almost unremarkable. There's no fireworks, no spiritual high, no grasping for more. Just a clear, simple knowing. Here's what most people miss about recognition. They're waiting for it to arrive as certainty, as a big, obvious moment they can point to and say, "There, that's it, I've arrived." But recognition is far more subtle than that. It's the moment you stop resisting what's already present. It's the instant your system relaxes into what it's always known but couldn't access because the mind was too loud, too insistent, too busy protecting its constructed version of reality. If this is landing for you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay connected to this frequency as we continue exploring consciousness together. The Arcturian perspective on human consciousness is fascinating because they don't see us as broken or incomplete. They see us as deliberately filtering our own awareness, narrowing our bandwidth so dramatically that we experience only a tiny fraction of what's actually available to us. From their vantage point, awakening isn't about gaining something new. It's about removing the filters, dissolving the barriers we've unconsciously constructed to feel safe in a reality that seems solid and predictable. Most signals are missed because the human mind has been conditioned to hunt for excitement, to chase after meaning, to demand explanations. But the signal the Arcturians send doesn't feed that hunger. It responds only to inner stillness. When your attention becomes steady and undistracted, your perception stops breaking reality into 1,000 pieces of mental noise. What's left is coherence, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived, felt alignment within your system. You're not downloading new information. You're remembering a baseline state that's always been accessible. This baseline state is what indigenous cultures have called original mind, what mystics have named pure consciousness, what quantum physicists might describe as the unified field before observation collapses it into particles. The Arcturians simply call it home frequency. It's the resonance your consciousness naturally returns to when all the conditioning, all the programming, all the survival responses finally quiet down enough for you to hear it. This is exactly why the Arcturian Council doesn't transmit loudly. Loud transmissions compete for space in a noisy field. Soft transmissions reveal what's already present. If this frequency feels familiar to you, that sense of familiarity isn't something new you're learning. It's recognition waking up to itself. Let yourself stay with that. Not to analyze it or figure it out, but to allow the awareness to complete the adjustment that's already begun inside you. There's a particular quality to Arcturian communication that distinguishes it from other forms of channeled material or spiritual teaching. It's not prescriptive. They're not telling you what to do or how to live. They're creating conditions within your consciousness where your own clarity can emerge naturally. It's like they're tuning forks, and when they sound their frequency clearly enough, something in you begins to resonate at that same frequency, not because you're copying them, but because that frequency was already latent within your system, waiting to be activated. Embodiment practice recognizing the silence. Sit exactly as you are. Don't shift into a perfect posture. Let your body find its own natural equilibrium. Bring your attention to the space just behind your eyes, deep in the center of your head. You're not trying to focus hard. You're just noticing. Observe your breath without controlling it. Where it flows easily, let it continue. Where it pauses naturally, allow that stillness. Now bring awareness to the sensation of your body's weight being held by gravity. There's nothing to hold up, nothing to fix or correct. As your attention settles deeper, notice something important. Clarity doesn't require effort. It's already here when the noise dies down. Don't try to visualize anything. Don't repeat affirmations. Just let your nervous system register this state as something familiar, something safe, something that's always available to you. Remain in this space for several breaths, long enough that your body understands nothing needs to happen right now. When you expand your attention outward again, bring this quality of stillness into your actions, not into more thinking. This practice doesn't end when you stop. It weaves into everything that follows. Now here's where it gets interesting. As you sit in this space, you might notice subtle sensations that have nothing to do with your physical body. You might feel a gentle expansion around your heart center. You might sense a presence that's not quite yours, but not quite separate from you either. You might experience what feels like a download of information that has no words attached to it. This is the beginning of direct Arcturian contact. They don't show up with angels and trumpets. They show up in the space you create through your own coherence. The second frequency, why most people can't hold the transmission. The transmission itself never vanishes. What vanishes is the internal capacity to maintain it. Most people brush up against this clarity for a brief moment and then unconsciously move away from it. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because steadiness feels foreign to a system trained on constant stimulation. Your nervous system has been shaped by repetition, by urgency, by endless engagement with external triggers. For many people, silence registers as emptiness, and emptiness gets filled immediately with distraction. Let's be honest about what happens in that moment when you touch clarity and then lose it. There's often a subtle panic that arises. Your ego structure, which has spent your entire life convinced that it needs to be doing something, managing something, controlling something in order to keep you safe, suddenly realizes there's nothing to do. And that nothingness feels threatening to a system built on perpetual activity. So it creates a problem, generates a thought, manufactures an emotion, anything to justify its continued existence as the manager of your experience. The Arcturian signal requires spaciousness without grasping. It doesn't respond to intensity. It doesn't amplify emotional drama. It doesn't reward fascination or spiritual seeking. It simply stabilizes your field. This is precisely why so few people maintain contact with it. Because maintaining the connection means letting go of the need to interpret every sensation, releasing the urge to build identity around the experience, and dropping the impulse to turn perception into a story. The instant your mind asks, "What is this doing for me? What am I getting out of this?" the signal dissolves back into static. Not because you're being punished, but because that's how energy physics works. Attention collapses wherever it seeks a reward or a payoff. Think about how you've been trained to interact with spiritual experiences. You've been taught to collect them, to catalog them, to use them as evidence of your progress on some imaginary spiritual ladder. You meditate so you can tell yourself you're someone who meditates. You have mystical experiences so you can build an identity as someone spiritual, someone special, someone chosen. But the Arcturian frequency doesn't feed that structure. It actually dissolves it. And that dissolution feels like death to the part of you that's been using spirituality to construct a better, more elevated version of yourself. Pause here and drop a comment below. What pattern or identity are you ready to release to make space for this transmission? Your words anchor the shift. The people who stay connected aren't more spiritually advanced or more enlightened than anyone else. They're simply less reactive. They don't rush to name what's happening. They don't need to claim it or own it. They allow their awareness to restructure without interference. This quality is rare, not because the signal itself is exclusive or selective, but because we live in a culture where distraction is completely normalized. The Arcturian Council doesn't fight against noise. It doesn't try to break through resistance or push harder when you're not ready. It doesn't repeat itself at higher volumes. It waits for you to align. Here's what alignment actually looks like in practical terms. It's not about perfect meditation posture or hours of silent retreat. It's about the small moments throughout your day when you choose presence over reaction. It's the moment in a difficult conversation when you take a breath instead of immediately defending yourself. It's the pause before you reach for your phone to fill empty time. It's the conscious choice to feel an uncomfortable emotion fully instead of distracting yourself with food, social media, or busy work. Each of these small moments creates a tiny opening in your field, and the Arcturian transmission flows through those openings like water finding cracks in concrete. When that alignment happens, the signal suddenly feels obvious, almost mundane even. And that's the actual test of readiness. People who expect transcendence, who want a peak spiritual experience, completely miss it. People who can remain present without needing something spectacular or extraordinary become stable enough to carry this frequency forward into their daily lives. Not as a belief system, but as a functional state of being, embodiment practice, sustaining the signal. Give yourself permission to feel what usually passes beneath your conscious awareness. Not thoughts, not mental images, but the felt sense beneath all explanation. Bring your attention into the center of your chest, not to activate or open anything, but simply to acknowledge what's been holding tension there. There's a quiet exhaustion many people carry that they never name. It's the exhaustion of being perpetually ready, always responding to the next thing, never truly arriving anywhere. Let yourself feel that without trying to fix it or make it go away. As your breath continues to move through you, notice how emotion begins to soften when you finally allow it to exist without giving it a purpose or a job to do. You don't need clarity right now. You don't need certainty about what this all means. You don't need to understand the Arcturian transmission intellectually. You only need to stay. Stay present with the sensation of being here, without being required to become something different than what you are. If emotion rises to the surface, let it rise. If nothing happens at all, let that be completely enough. This is how the signal stabilizes itself inside you, not through effort or striving, but through simple permission. Pay attention to what happens in your body when you give it permission to just be, without agenda, without improvement project, without spiritual goal. There's often a wave of relief that moves through, sometimes accompanied by tears, sometimes by laughter, sometimes by just a deep settling. That relief is your system recognizing that it's safe to stop performing, stop proving, stop pushing. And in that space of permission, the Arcturian frequency has room to land and integrate. Feel what happens in your body when it realizes it doesn't have to chase meaning anymore. Let that relief move through you and settle in. This is what most people cannot sustain, and this is exactly why you can. Stay in this space for several breaths beyond the point where it feels comfortable. That slight discomfort is where integration actually occurs. When you move forward from here, carry this gentleness with you, not as a memory you're trying to recall, but as a new baseline for how awareness itself can feel in your system. Now take a moment right now and comment below with this phrase: I am ready to receive clearly. Not as an affirmation you're trying to make true, but as a signal to the field that you're creating conscious space for this transmission. When you write those words and post them, you're doing something more than just engaging with content. You're declaring to your own consciousness and to the collective field that you're choosing alignment. You're interrupting the unconscious loop of passive consumption and actively participating in your own awakening. Let that phrase anchor this frequency into your reality. The third frequency, when the search dissolves, there's a threshold moment that doesn't announce itself with fanfare. No lightning bolt revelation, no peak mystical experience, no dramatic awakening. The urge to seek just loosens its grip. You might notice it when the question, "What should I be feeling right now?" stops carrying weight. Not because you finally found the answer, but because the question itself became irrelevant. Seeking isn't wrong or misguided. It's how consciousness learns where its edges are. But eventually, that outward movement exhausts itself. Your nervous system begins to recognize that constantly searching is just another form of tension wearing a spiritual mask, and something inside you softens. This is where confusion often enters. Without seeking, the mind expects to find nothing, a void, an absence. But what actually arrives instead is a subtle sense of fullness, a quiet sufficiency, a recognition that nothing essential is missing from this present moment. This phase is particularly disorienting for people who have spent years, sometimes decades, on the spiritual path. They've built entire identities around being seekers, around attending workshops, reading books, following teachers, collecting practices and techniques. And now, suddenly, none of that feels necessary anymore. It's not that the knowledge was wrong or useless. It's that the motivation underneath all that seeking has dissolved. You're no longer trying to get somewhere, to become someone, to achieve some enlightened state. You're simply here, exactly as you are, and somehow that's enough. The Arcturian perspective on seeking is compassionate but clear. They see it as a necessary phase, like childhood, that consciousness moves through in order to learn about itself. But just as you eventually outgrow childhood, you eventually outgrow seeking. And the transition can be uncomfortable because it means releasing the very thing that gave your life direction and meaning for so long. It means trusting that what emerges from simply being present will be more aligned, more authentic, more true than anything you could strategically pursue. Now, what we're exploring today touches on something much deeper, a complete system of consciousness transformation that the Arcturians have been transmitting for those ready to move beyond seeking into actual embodiment. If you're feeling called to understand the full architecture of how frequency transmission works, how to shift from unconscious broadcasting to conscious creation, I've compiled everything into Beyond the Frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery. It walks you through the 9 master frequencies and the exact process of moving from reaction to resonance, from manifestation to becoming the field itself. It's linked in the pinned comment below. Life becomes less about symbols and interpretations and more about direct, immediate contact. You stop scanning every experience for hidden meaning and start meeting reality exactly as it presents itself. This isn't apathy or spiritual bypassing. This is intimacy without demand. Emotions still move through your system, but they no longer drag your awareness along with them. Thoughts still appear in your mind, but they no longer define which direction you're facing. You start to see that clarity isn't something you produce through effort or technique. It reveals itself naturally the moment effort gets out of the way. Here's what this looks like in ordinary moments. You're washing dishes, and instead of being lost in thought about the past or future, you're actually feeling the warm water on your hands, noticing the weight of the plate, hearing the sound of ceramic against ceramic. You're in a conversation, and instead of rehearsing what you're going to say next, you're actually listening to the other person, taking in not just their words, but the tone, the energy, the unspoken message underneath the language. You're walking, and instead of using the time to plan or worry, you're feeling your feet making contact with the ground, noticing the temperature of the air on your skin, hearing the ambient sounds of the environment. This is presence. This is the end of seeking. And paradoxically, this is where the Arcturian transmission becomes most clear, most accessible, most integrated into your actual lived experience. The Arcturian Council doesn't make a dramatic appearance at this stage of development. It doesn't need to. This stage is the signal learning to hold itself without external support. The people who reach this threshold rarely talk about it with others, not because it's secret mystical knowledge, but because language starts to feel unnecessary. Something simpler and more direct has taken root in their being. And once the seeking phase completes itself, what remains isn't emptiness or absence. It's a quality of presence that no longer asks to be anywhere other than exactly where it is. Embodiment practice. Releasing the search. Allow your attention to rest wherever it naturally lands. Don't pull it back to center. Don't aim it toward anything specific. Just notice the subtle tension that comes from wanting something to happen. That quiet forward lean inside your awareness. Feel that now without trying to change your breathing pattern. Let that leaning soften just slightly, as if your awareness were allowed to settle back into itself instead of reaching outward. You might feel a wave of emotion move through. You might feel a simple release. You might feel nothing particularly noteworthy. All of these responses are completely correct. Let your body register what's true in this moment. Nothing is missing right now. You don't need to arrive somewhere else. You don't need external confirmation. You don't need to understand what comes next in your journey. Feel how presence deepens and expands when it's no longer being used as a tool to get somewhere. This is what the end of seeking actually feels like. Not an achievement you can claim, but a release you can surrender into. Remain here for several breaths beyond what your mind prefers. That discomfort you might feel isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's the last residue of the old habit dissolving. When you return to activity and movement, carry this new reference point with you. Clarity doesn't come from searching harder or looking in more places. It comes from allowing awareness to rest exactly where it already is. This practice completes itself the moment you stop trying to hold on to it. If what we're exploring here is resonating with something deep inside you, if you're feeling that subtle shift happening in your system, then I invite you to subscribe. Not just to this channel, but to this frequency, to this space where consciousness explores itself without pretense or performance. Subscribe to stay connected to this conversation, to this community of people who are choosing presence over distraction, who are learning to trust their own direct experience more than any external authority. The more of us who align with this frequency, the more the collective field shifts to reflect that coherence. You're not subscribing to consume content. You're subscribing to participate in a movement of conscious awakening that's happening across the planet right now. The fourth frequency, operating without resistance. When clarity becomes stable in your system, it doesn't turn inward and hide. It moves into your life, not as effort, not as control, but as natural function. You start noticing small shifts first. Conversations carry less emotional charge. You listen to people without mentally preparing your response while they're still speaking. Silence between words no longer feels like empty space that needs to be filled immediately. These subtle changes transform relationships in ways that explanation never could. People feel less resistance when they're around you, not because you've started agreeing with everything they say, but because you've stopped unconsciously pushing against their experience. Friction dissolves in the space where presence replaces automatic reaction. In your family dynamics, this shows up as patience that doesn't require suppressing anything. In your work environment, it appears as precision without urgent pressure. In conflict situations, it manifests as steadiness without withdrawing or shutting down. You stop trying to make people understand you, and paradoxically, you find yourself being understood far more often. This isn't emotional detachment or spiritual bypassing. This is emotional availability without getting tangled up in other people's processes. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. Imagine someone you care about is upset, venting to you about a problem they're facing. The old pattern would be to either try to fix their problem, give them advice, or get pulled into their emotional state and become upset yourself. But when you're functioning from this frequency of coherence, you can be fully present with their emotion without taking it on as your own. You can listen deeply without needing to change anything about their experience. You can offer support without needing them to feel better so you can feel better. This is the kind of mature, grounded presence that actually helps people, not the anxious, fix-it energy that most people bring to emotional situations. Your nervous system becomes a stable reference point in any environment. Other people unconsciously begin to regulate their own systems around the coherence you're emanating. You're not absorbing their chaos and making it yours. You're not trying to fix or correct them. You're reducing the amplitude of reactivity simply by how you remain present. This is how real influence operates in the world, not through teaching or convincing with words, but through coherence expressed as lived behavior. Think about what this means for your relationships, your work, your creative projects, your entire way of moving through the world. When you're no longer generating friction through unconscious resistance, everything flows more smoothly. Opportunities appear that you weren't even looking for. Connections happen naturally. Solutions to problems emerge without forced effort. This isn't magical thinking or manifestation technique. This is physics. When you stop creating energetic interference patterns through constant reaction and resistance, the natural intelligence of the universe has space to move through your life in ways it couldn't before. You begin to notice that life requires far less explanation when you're no longer creating internal resistance to what's actually happening. Decisions become simpler and clearer. Healthy boundaries establish themselves naturally. Your energy stops leaking away through unnecessary engagement and defense. Your functioning becomes efficient because it's no longer being driven by the need to protect a fragile sense of self. The Arcturian Council doesn't need you to convince other people of anything. It doesn't need you to represent it or defend it. It operates through individuals who move cleanly through the world without creating unnecessary friction. Wherever you are, something in the field stabilizes. That's the signal expressing itself through action. The Arcturians have a particular interest in how coherent humans affect the larger collective field. They understand that consciousness is not isolated in individual bodies, but is fundamentally interconnected through what they call the unified field. When one person achieves stable coherence, it creates a ripple effect that touches everyone in their sphere of influence, and even extends beyond that into the larger collective consciousness. You might think of yourself as just one person, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But from the Arcturian perspective, one coherent human being is like a tuning fork that helps bring the entire orchestra into harmony. Embodiment practice, functioning in flow. Before your next interaction today, whether it's with a person, a task, or a situation, pause for a brief moment. Not to prepare yourself or put up protective walls, but simply to arrive fully. Feel where your feet make contact with the ground beneath you. Let your shoulders drop naturally without forcing them down. As you enter the interaction, notice the impulse to react immediately, to explain yourself, to defend your position, to correct what feels wrong. Don't suppress that impulse. Just don't follow it automatically. Keep your attention anchored in your body while the conversation or situation unfolds around you. Listen completely before you speak. If words arise from that listening, let them come from clarity rather than urgency. If silence appears in the space, let it remain without rushing to fill it. Notice how friction and resistance reduce dramatically when you stop adding your own reactive energy to the situation. In moments when tension rises, bring your awareness to the natural pause that happens after you exhale. That pause is your anchor point back to presence. You don't need to manage the outcome. You don't need to change the other person or fix the situation. Your task is simpler than that. Remain present without contracting. Each time you practice this, your nervous system learns a new default setting. Clarity becomes portable, something you carry with you. Function becomes clean. This isn't a practice you perform once and check off your list. This is how you live, one interaction at a time. Daily anchor phrase, silent resonance. You don't need to speak this out loud. Just let it register internally in your awareness. Stay present. Respond consciously. Release attachment. Use this anchor whenever an interaction begins to intensify or pull you out of center. The fifth frequency, becoming the stable point. At a certain stage, stability stops feeling like something you're practicing or working on. It becomes the way you naturally move through reality. You no longer check constantly to see if you're centered. You simply notice when you're not, and you return to center without effort or drama. This is what it actually means to live as a fixed reference point in a fluctuating world. Not rigid or unchanging, but internally reliable. Life continues to move and shift around you. People remain unpredictable. Circumstances still challenge your attention and test your stability. The difference is subtle but absolutely decisive. You're no longer being carried along by the movement. Reactivity loses its automatic grip on your system. Emotions pass through without displacing your sense of self. Thoughts arise and dissolve without hijacking your orientation. What's fascinating about reaching this stage is that it doesn't feel particularly special or elevated. There's no halo, no constant bliss, no permanent state of transcendence. You still get irritated sometimes. You still feel sadness, frustration, confusion. The difference is that these states no longer define you. They move through like weather patterns moving through the sky, and you remain like the sky itself, vast and unchanging beneath all the atmospheric conditions. If you've experienced even a glimpse of this stable presence, share it in the comments. What moment showed you that you are the sky, not the weather passing through? Other people might not consciously notice what's changed in you, but they feel it at a subtle level. Your presence becomes a point of orientation for them. Not because you're guiding them or telling them what to do, but because you're not drifting. In relationships, this quality feels like safety without control or manipulation. In work, it shows up as consistency without pressure or force. In solitude, it settles in as ease without the need to escape yourself. You stop broadcasting your internal states to everyone around you. You stop explaining your inner processes or justifying your experience. life becomes quieter and infinitely more precise. The Arcturian Council doesn't mark this stage with a ceremony or a cosmic announcement. There's no acknowledgement, no formal initiation, no visible threshold you cross that others can witness. Because at this point in your development, you're no longer just receiving the signal from an external source. You are maintaining it, generating it, becoming it. A fixed reference point doesn't try to convince the system it's stable through effort or willpower. It simply remains. And because it remains steady, everything in proximity to it begins to recalibrate naturally. This isn't a role you're playing. This isn't a spiritual mission you've been assigned. This is the absence of unnecessary movement and reactivity. And from that absence, clarity becomes utterly dependable. Here's what the Arcturians want you to understand about this final stage. It's not an ending, it's actually a new beginning. Once you've stabilized as a coherent reference point, you become available for entirely new levels of contact, new forms of service, new expressions of consciousness that weren't accessible when you were still working on your own internal stability. The real work, from their perspective, begins here. This is where you become a conscious conduit for higher frequencies to anchor into physical reality. This is where your specific gifts, your unique expression, your particular way of translating higher consciousness into form becomes available to move through you. Embodiment practice, embodying the reference. Sit or stand exactly as you are in this moment. No adjustment or correction is needed. Let your attention settle into the center of your body. Not high in your head, not low in your belly, but in the neutral, available center. Notice that awareness is already present here, requiring no effort whatsoever. Now feel the clear distinction between the movement happening inside you and the movement happening around you in your environment. Thoughts might move through your mind. Emotions might pass through your body. External circumstances might shift and change. Let all of that move. You remain. There's no need to hold stability in place through force. Stability holds itself when nothing interferes with it. Feel what happens in your body when it realizes it doesn't need to constantly recalibrate anymore. Your breath becomes completely natural. Your posture organizes itself. Your attention stops scanning for threats or opportunities. This is the fixed reference point. Not frozen or rigid, not tense or controlled, just present enough to not drift with every passing current. Stay in this space for several full breaths, long enough for your nervous system to recognize this as its new default setting. When you return to action and engagement, don't try to maintain this state through effort. Let it maintain you. Wherever you move, whatever unfolds, this reference point inside you does not move. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require constant reinforcement or validation. It simply remains. Integration, anchoring the transmission. This transmission doesn't complete its cycle in silence alone. It stabilizes when it's recognized and acknowledged. If this frequency settled into your system, if something shifted as you moved through this message, let it leave a tangible trace. Recognition is what anchors awareness into form. Signals that go unacknowledged tend to dissipate back into the field. When you engage by marking this moment, by allowing it to be witnessed, by letting others encounter this same frequency, you're not just supporting content. You're stabilizing the coherent field that moved through your awareness. A simple action is enough. Presence doesn't need elaborate explanation. If a single word arises in your awareness right now, clarity, aligned, present, grounded, here, coherent, awakened, steady, available, place it in the comments below. That act of writing fixes the reference point in your consciousness. And if you recognize someone in your life whose nervous system is ready for less noise and more precision, whose awareness is prepared for this frequency, let this transmission reach them. Signals like this one travel farther and touch more lives when the people who recognize them don't keep them hidden. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, not to convince them of anything, but to offer them an opportunity to recognize what they already know. The Arcturian Council doesn't repeat the same transmission twice. What you received here must be anchored into your reality. Before you leave this space, write one word in the comments section. That single written word becomes the anchor. It marks your recognition. It stabilizes the field around you. Let it be seen by others. Let it be shared. Let it be marked in the collective field. The quantum field itself responds to conscious participation. And if you haven't already, subscribe to stay connected, to stay coherent, to stay aligned with this frequency as it continues to unfold and deepen. Because this isn't a one-time transmission. This is an ongoing conversation between your consciousness and the intelligence that pervades all of reality. The more you engage with this material, the more your system learns to recognize and hold these frequencies. The more you participate in this community, the stronger the collective field becomes. We're not just individuals consuming content. We're nodes in a network of awakening consciousness. And every time you show up, every time you engage, every time you anchor what you're receiving, you're strengthening that network for everyone. Now, understanding that the Arcturian Council is speaking to you is just the beginning. The next level is recognizing what happens when you stop needing anything from the universe and simply allow yourself to become magnetic. When you release all attachment to outcomes, you shift from chasing to attracting, from force to flow. This is the frequency where miracles become ordinary, where synchronicities multiply, where reality itself reorganizes around your coherence. That's exactly what we explore in the next transmission.